Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And thank you very much, everybody, for joining us here today in this beautiful Sunday afternoon. It is the KESH American Knowledge Team meeting, and as always, it is a very powerful meeting because we are represented here from so many different continents, and this is really hard to believe. That's one of the nice things about the new technology that we have today. It's able to bring us together during this live transmission, and we follow up the sequence with respect to the Knowledge Seekers workshops, and then the Brazilian team meeting on Friday, and then our meeting here on Sunday, as we try and unravel in layman's terms as best as we can what transpired a couple of months ago in Sanya in China, where we had a watershed moment and we discovered the new technology and the realization of how this technology is going to affect us. And so we are in the post-Sanya era. And as such, we have, well, please excuse me one moment. Something has happened here. I have lost a page. So much for this excellent review here. Just stand by 1 second as I see if I can fix this. So this occasionally happens to me.
Yeah, no problem. No problem at all.
Part of the usual thing, you have everything working perfectly, and then suddenly something happens to mess it up.
Yeah, and
So-
I think we missed one word in the disclaimer. Do you think we could play that again? Just joking. We will play it at the end, and we've played it at the beginning. So there's 3 selections of the disclaimer in our presentation. And hopefully that is enough to suffice.
Yes, so hopefully, oh, something else has happened. Unbelievable. I see what's happened. Okay, we will get it. We will get it.
No problem. If you need more time, Alex, I can pause the recording if you'd like.
No, I just have
Okay.
to. I just have to click on the right things. That's all. Okay, and this is the KESH Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science, and well, now just a moment here.
Well, we see the slide on transition range.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Okay.
Yes, okay. Always there's something changes from week to week, right?
Yeah.
You just have to stay on top of everything. This is the Keshe Foundation Special Institute teachings on plasma science. We're discussing basic transition, and the subject today is the transition range. So my name is Alexander. I am from Canada. Thank you very much for being here. It is May the 12th, 2024. This is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. And so, as you mentioned about the Brazilian community, they got us going 4 years ago with public teaching. And we started with basic teaching, and now we've graduated to basic transition as we're trying to keep up with Mr. Keshe. And that in itself is a challenge. And then more importantly, it's something that he's been broadcasting for over 10 years. And so we have thousands of hours of teaching, and how do we keep up with that? So it's hard enough for us as mature students, but it's a real mountain to climb for new students. And so we're trying to facilitate that. And in the same aspect, mentioning that, we have to understand that this knowledge is embedded within us. So it's not a matter of just getting the knowledge. We have to acknowledge the knowledge. And then we have to figure out how to apply it, because what we've been applying has been a small part, because we've been stuck on this hesitancy highway. And of course, it's at the lowest energy state. And, we know how hard life is. But this is why they say life is hard until you get up on the horse. But you really have to be careful, because you've got to pick the winning horse. And what does it mean to be a winner? So we're trying to discuss the teachings of Narantevika Keshe as it was laid out in 3 books, starting with the universal order of creation of matter. And as we see these field forces coming together, and I think most of us are at the point now that we should certainly understand these 3 fields and 3 forces. But what we don't understand, maybe in book number 2, is the structure of the light. And so we're discussing that in more detail, because let's face it, it comes from somewhere and it goes somewhere. And we know that because we can see it, and we can also shine a light, and we can do all sorts of things with light. But when we get to book number 3, the origin of the universe, well, that is so elusive, because we don't seem to understand how these fields interact, and how one field can become 2 fields, or how 2 fields can become 1 field, and not understanding the relationship of it. Well, we're going to have to understand, because where we're headed through is now through the transmutation training sessions, which, to date stamp this, the next session is coming this Friday, May the 17th, and it will be the 5th of a series of 6 sessions. So, a lot of people like a 6-pack. So this is the 5th part of that 6-pack. And it is helping us learn things that we really already know. It's just that we seem to ignore this. So how can we bring this to the foreground, if you will? So not only to accept it, but to understand how to apply it. And of course, the most important thing is that this technology is for the purposes of peace. And so for 325 weeks now, we have been trying to bring this one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace together. And in many ways, we are succeeding. And it all depends on how you measure this. So the thing is that we are in a process. This is all part of the process that wasn't there before. It certainly wasn't there when I was younger. But a lot of people are saying now, we don't know exactly what's going on, but we can feel that something has changed. And so we have this relentless search for outer space. But to understand outer space, because we've never been in outer space, not as the current humanity, because we have to get on that plasma highway to that little slippery pie in the sky. And, you're not supposed to step on your food, you're supposed to eat it. But we find that it's just a tiny portion of our universe. In fact, it's so tiny that it's would really be invisible on this picture if I didn't have the red dot there. And then when you look at the rest of the universe, you say, well, wait a second, how do we get on that plasma highway to get to this, the far reaches beyond when we're just on a transmission highway at the lowest energy level? So we've stepped up well, we're trying to step up anyway to the transition highway, because that is an intermediate step between the lowest energy level and other energy levels. So it's hard to step up because we only assume that there's only one transition highway, because there are a lot of transition highways, aren't there? So when we look at the range and of the universe, and you see, what we are doing and how tiny and small it is. So we wonder, if we want to get to the other end, we can't go at the speed limit that our car can go. We have to go at the speed of light. And is the speed of light the fastest transmission? So we've had a strong debate on that. And then if we go to that far extreme, do we have to be as big as the universe then? And so all of that has been relegated to the dumpster heap, because we're now moving ahead in a new understanding. But the thing that has come forward is the question of, is speed of light constant? Is that the constant transmission? And then, of course, what are we transmitting? And so if we look at everything and we say, well, what does everything consist of? So we find that we claim that 70% of the universe is hydrogen. Well, if that's true, what's the rest of it? And if the rest of it, where is it? And is that where we are, or are we on the 70%? So, we just seem to have that little magrav pie, and because that's the lowest energy level, and yet that's the smallest part. So how do we navigate? And is there a map? So the hydrogen seems to navigate very well, because we have a gravitational confirmation of the hydrogen. And not only that, we know specifically that it is hydrogen because it has a spectrum, it has a unique fingerprint. It tells us what it is. And so if we understand that it's a gravitational confirmation of magnetical field forces coming together, and when they come together, well, they come together from somewhere, and then from that somewhere, they travel as a spectrum, as a light. Okay, so now we understand the basic structure of the light is reflected in the hydrogen spectrum. And if we understand that the hydrogen spectrum is a manifestation of the creation, which is a magrav, then the embodiment of all of that light energy is within the magrav. Okay, well, this is very good. So we understand that the principal matter is this energy pack, which comes to this magrav. So all of these packs are coming, and they come as a parcel. But when we say energy, it's generic. We're not specifying which energy. And when we say parcel, it might be in a brown box shipping container, but we don't know what's inside, do we? So how do we sort that one out? Well, we have to understand that there's a principal interaction of this energy, that it's always in motion, and as such, energy that's in motion is coming and going, but it is also going and coming. So in other words, it's a two-way street. So the two fundamental suppliers of this energy naturally are the sun and the earth. And in that process, we have further confirmation, and that is that we have oxygen. Well, wait a second. I thought we had gravitational confirmation from hydrogen. Well, we also have it from oxygen. And actually, this is a very good thing because when we combine hydrogen and oxygen, well, you know what we get? The answer, of course, is water. And interestingly enough, this is a maggraph and it's round. But that's kind of strange, isn't it? Because we have two hydrogens, which are kind of tiny, and we have this big fat oxygen. And so there seems to be an imbalance in this balanced maggraph. And I wonder how that works. Well, this is the point. The entire water molecule is an energy pack. And so, as such, it embodies energy. And so, because it's a universal solvent, it must share this energy. And it shares this by literally sharing off one of these hydrogen ions. And so, we see this hydrogen is actually energy. And of course, energy is always positive. So, if we are shearing off a positive energy, that means, oh my God, we're left with a negative charge. So now that's called a hydroxyl. So it still has one hydrogen and it has one oxygen, and it still is water, but it's not the water that we think it is. It is looking for a partner. And obviously, the ideal partner would be another water. So having not determined that, we're just going to say that the positive energy is energy in motion, and the negative energy is energy in motion. So the positive and negative energy actually indicates the direction. And we see that the negative gives and the positive takes. So we know that the energy can give and take from itself. So that would be a binding force. But it has to give and take from another source. Otherwise, we wouldn't have anything. So it has to be flowing. So, prime example, if a hydroxyl looks for another water molecule, then it becomes water. But if it looks for, say, soup, then it becomes something else. And so it's flowing. It's still water, but now it has other energy in it and is sharing that energy. So, and it's still fluid. Well, that's good for the water, but we also have the air and we also have energy in motion. And then, of course, we have the rest of the universe. And so we can conclude that the creation of the universe comes from energy and it is always in motion. And because it always has to combine with something, that means all things are in combination. And so if they're in combination, then we have to decide which way the flow goes. And so that's the charge. Energy is a charge in motion. Okay, so we're good there. Oh, one moment, please. So we exchange energy in the cups of life. And this was very fundamental because the cups of life were brought out during the pandemic, and they weren't the cups of the pandemic. They had to do with our inner space energy, which was reflected as our emotional strength. So sometimes we think about strength as being physical. Well, yes. So one of these cups is the emotional one. That's the one with the white gans, and the one of the one is the physical, is the one with the copper gans on the right hand side. And so these are both a form of energy exchange. And so we can differentiate that there's an emotional exchange and there's a physical exchange, but they are representative of the same thing: energy in motion, energy in combination, coming and going. And then what came was this Gans radiance manifestation. And we've seen that we could create ganses out of these cups of life. And so we had copper GANs and calcium GANs, zinc, copper, amino acid GANs, and even water GANs. And did we know that it was GANs, or was the water just getting dirty and we just threw it away? And, for some people, you give them gold and they trade it in for wood. So they just don't know the value. And so, well, guess what? We even have a gold GANS. So we find that all the elements actually have a GANS manifestation as part of their radiance manifestation. So when we look at whatever we have, that is part of the transmission. And so that involves our x-axis, y-axis, and z-axis combination, which we've seen dealt with rotation, polarity, and field strength. But now we're going through a transition dimension of the x-axis to a different level of transmission. And so we find that we need to have the transmission of the three dimensions that we discussed, the rotation, polarity, and field strength. Well, do we have that in the transition dimension? And that's what we're discussing. And then if we have that, can we say that that is the medium? Because that is the transmission medium. And if you're transmitting something, then there has to be a message. And so that becomes what we're looking at when we say when two forces come together. Well, they come together through this transmission of energy. And what is the message that they carry? Well, the combination of the two are very specific because they create an x-axis dimension and a y-axis dimension, which is an interaction of these forces. And it's very specific to this interaction, which means it's not the only interaction. There are other interactions. We're just talking about generic two forces interaction. So if we have different forces coming together with different interactions, we may have some conflict. But, excuse me, if we bring the plasma rule into play, which is the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, then that interaction also becomes a conflict point. So there has to be some kind of alteration, and that is a deflection. And because of that deflection, that point of conflict becomes a point of containment, assuming, of course, that there's a common denominator between those two energies coming together. So if they come together, you don't want to have an accident. What you want is to create something. And so now when we create, we know that it's part of the binding. And binding is very important because it fulfills a self-serving requirement. And so we get this energy from the universe, and through the binding process, we fulfill our self-serving needs. So why do we continue to do this at the expense of others? Because logic would say, oh, well, I guess that's the first problem. Okay, so the second thing logic would say is that the other is also taking energy binding for a self-serving purpose. But if they're depleted because we're stealing it, then how do they compensate? So either becomes a point of conflict with you because you're stealing and they want it back, or they're resigned to the fact that you're just a crook. And so it obviously you're successful at being a crook. So they will emulate that and they will become a crook. And so being a crook leads to lying, leads to cheating, and ends up eventually leading to killing. And so we have these energy binding actions getting on in an ever stronger field force. And as they get into a very strong field force, they get farther and farther away from the point of creation. Well, actually, they are creating something. They are creating something at the lower energy level and making it very, very gravitational. So this makes it even more difficult to move. I mean, if you get it to the lowest energy level, let's say that of a stone, the only way a stone can move is if you pick it up and throw it. But we can move around. We make cars, and they can move around. So we do have a transmission, but we are also having to transition at varying speeds. So we can crawl, we can walk, we can run, and so then we decide, well, that if that's on the ground, then which ground? And so we have to consider that the water is part of that ground, and then the air is part of that ground. Well, and if those things are all part of the ground, then there are other things that are part of the ground. So we could be right in saying, well, which ground? Because whatever we're grounded to is how we capture the field. And when we capture this field, we have to be able to change our position. Well, how do we change our position then? That becomes a real concern. So when we look at the transmission of the x-axis and the transition of the y-axis and the transmutation of the z-axis, then we have to decide, okay, how do we move? How is that possible to move? There's no accounting for moving. Because all we're saying is that there's an X, Y, and Z axis, and that's the only thing that we're saying. And so this is reflected if we look at the rings of Saturn and we say, well, wait a second. The body of the planet is different from the rings. And there's a gap between the planet and the rings. So is the gap nothing? Was the gap caused by nothing? What about the shadows? Was that caused by nothing? And then there's a gap between the body and the rings, but there's also a gap between the rings themselves. So what causes this change? So clearly, whatever the body of the planet is different from whatever the rings are, which is different from what other rings are. And so there's no accounting for the difference here. And so if we look at Jupiter's rings and we see this side view, and we have the same problem. We have a flat main ring, and then we have this gossamer ring, and there's a double ring, and there's a gap between the rings. So the rings themselves are not the same, and then there's the gaps. So we can also say that the gaps are not the same. So there's no counting for this, but clearly there's a transmission at a different level, isn't there? So when we look at the water, which is the solvent of life on this planet, we identify it with the pH scale, which is a potentiation of hydrogen. But understand it's also a potentiation of oxygen because it's water. And so in order to have water, you have to have both. So if there's a release of hydrogen, you can bank on the fact that there'll be a release of oxygen as well. So as we go from a higher pH, which is very stable and very complex, and of course it's alkaline and therefore it's gravitational, it takes us down to a very unstable, the lowest pH, which is very simple, highly acidic, and so that becomes magnetical. And so there's everything in between. And the question is, where in between and what is the susceptibility? And so if we look at the impact of pH on our DNA transcription, we find that in a healthy cell, the alkaline level of the water creates a nice DNA shape. But in an unhealthy acidic cell, the DNA itself starts to expand. And then, of course, when it's on the coroner's table, it's flat. And the other thing, of course, is that it's anaerobic, which means it doesn't have any oxygen. Well, of course, if it's highly acidic, it's losing hydrogen. Well, it's losing oxygen as well. So this is the impact that we have on the pH. And it's pretty violent. So it takes us to the extremes. So when we talk about this selection process, we see that we have a natural selection. Unfortunately, that's a selection we made when we were babies. And then as we became adults, well, we've introduced man-made regulation. And that's where the problems are, because we feel that, there are some who are the chosen ones. And then that begs the question, who did the choosing? And what does it mean to be chosen? Were you chosen to be the ruler, or were you chosen to be the cattle? And so we have this potentiation of range anomaly where both ends of the spectrum are extreme. So assuming that, if we get into below 1, that nothing can exist. And then above 14, well, nothing can exist. Well, is that true? And so if they're both extreme, how can they both be the same? Well, they're not the same, because what happens is that as we approach the extremes, things change. And so, hello to the periodic table of elements. So these are the Earth space range details. And we see that we have different elements in different parts of the Earth. And so each one of them has a gravitational conformation. Well, this is good, because that's provided by the Earth. So the Earth understands this, and I've never seen it in a class, but it seems to know how to take energy in and more in through the gravitational field forces of attraction, which we call absorption. So that energy is absorbed, and we create the periodic table of elements. But the Earth is not getting fatter and fatter and fatter, because it, through the process of magnetical force fields of repulsion, energy is being emitted, and more is going out, and more is going out, and more keeps going out and is supplemented and offset by energy coming in. And why is this important? Well, because without this characteristic, we would not be able to rotate around our axis, and we wouldn't be able to circle around the sun. That would be impossible. So the in and out of the energy maintains the gravitational conformation, but it also maintains the magnetical conformation, which is representative of energy in motion. So getting back to the potentiation of hydrogen, we see that, as we go down the pH scale, we start to lose hydrogen, which means there's a water splitting. When we lose hydrogen, we lose oxygen. So they get split, that bond between the two splits up, and it always totals 14. And this becomes an important point to consider when we look at materialization selection of the periodic table of elements and other materials around the world. We find that they're kind of location specific. So, there's copper in Chile and gold in Indonesia and oil in the Middle East. So they're pretty specific, not the only places, but, the question becomes is, how do we achieve this location positioning? Because the Earth is spinning, isn't it? And it's spinning every day. And yet the gold goes where the gold goes, and the copper goes where the copper goes. And, if the oil is a little bit fluid, it could get kind of messy if there wasn't some kind of materialization selection. So the answer is something beyond what we can see, touch, and feel. And so everything that we can see, touch, and feel is representing this two-way transmission, where we're talking about these two dimensions and two-way streets, and two directions on these two-way streets, and we can travel in different size vehicles and different types of vehicles, and we can add more lanes. So we always have these selections, and this is only on the x-axis transmission, but what we're talking about is other ways to do this. So we know that there are other ways because we already have a problem with the relationship between the scientific community and the spiritual community. We are conducting our science based on relationships. So in the plasma science, it's magnetical gravitational balancing, what we call the MAGRAV. But in the scientific community, it has to do with the conservation of energy. So in the spiritual community, there's no conservation here. It's just we're trying to figure out the spirit and the soul and how they work together. So we find now that it's the plasma science which brings these relationships together and adds to the knowledge. And this is very good because in the conservation of energy, it states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only be converted. And so what are we doing? We're converting kinetic energy and potential energy. And we find that the balance of the kinetic and potential energy on one side is equal to the balance of the kinetic energy and potential energy on the other side, which means that the relationship between the kinetic and potential energy is constant. It's constant again. And so when we look at the pH density range, and we find that there are differences, there's acidity and alkalinity, but that totals 14. The water splitting always totals 14. So regardless of the density, the pH is constant. There's that constant again. So when we look at the potentiation of strength, we find that we can take the stronger to feed the weaker. So the strong being the initial potential energy and the weak being the final potential energy. Why is the strong feeding the weak? Well, because it's seeking balance. Do we want to achieve balance? Because if we achieve balance, well, nothing would happen. So what we realize is that there are sequences, and we can order these sequences. So if we understand the rules of the gravitational feeding, the gravitational feedback from the attraction of what we attract, what we're attracting is the magnetical feeding, what has been repelled. And so in turn, if we do repelling, then we're feeding. So then if we're feeding, then we need to have some feedback. And so we are the last man standing. We're the one who makes the choices. These are choices that we don't want to defer to someone else. And, you know, when we look at the health aspect of it, when we can't look after our health, then we defer this to others. This is really unfortunate because we can turn on and turn off the feeding. We can either increase or decrease the strength, and we can enhance or diminish the positioning because the stronger feeds the weaker. And we can choose to be the stronger and we can choose to be the weaker. In other words, we can be fed or we can do the feeding. It all depends on our ordering. So when we look at reflections or illusions, is a reflection only what we can see? Or is a reflection a manifestation of an illusion? Whereas an illusion is something that we can't see. But if it's an illusion, how come it manifests? And so this becomes a kind of a dilemma. And we say, well, what you see is what you get, and that's all you get. And is it uniform? Well, there is one thing that is kind of constant and uniform, and that is the relationship between the wavelength and frequency, because these represent light. And so the relationship between wavelength and frequency represents the color of the light that we can see. And this relationship is constant. And since the speed of light is constant, then what causes the change in the color? So it's the interaction of the wavelength and the interaction of the frequency and the interaction of the environment. Well, wait a second, I can only see the wavelength and I can see the frequency, but I can't see the interaction with the environment. Where did this come from? Where did this energy come from? And if it's constant, then it's all that I can see. But what about the stuff that I can't see? So that's not part of my environment. So if the speed of light is constant, how do we get this different frequency? So then we find that the difference in speed has to do with distance. But if we shorten the distance and maintain the speed, and if we put it on a track, and then we find that we can change the frequency being the number of times we rotate around the center. So since the blue light has a higher frequency than the red light, then the absorption of the blue light must be closer to the core, and the red light must be farther away. So what seems to be a difference in the speed of light is actually a difference in the speed in the frequency. And so the frequency is determined by the diameter, not the speed. The speed of light is constant in all cases. So getting back to the pH, we see that the water splitting is always 14, which means if you have acidic water that's 4, you can also create alkaline water that is 10. 10 and 4 being 14. But the same is true for 9 and 5. The same is true for 6 and 8. But what about 7? Well, 7 must be 7 plus 7. A combination of alkalinity and acidity, which makes it neutral. If it wasn't 7 plus 7, in other words, if neutral was 0, then you wouldn't have water, would you? So it has to be something. It can't be nothing. So we find that because of this determination, what I call this pH zipper, then the question becomes is, how do we move the zipper up and down? Because if I am creating a pH of 4, I'm creating another pH of 10. Doesn't account for creating 5 or 9. But if I create 5 and 9, it doesn't account for 6 or 8. So I just don't know how to move the zipper. And then the question really becomes is, well, how do we get this transmission going? And is there a rotating field? And, do we just kind of drive along, or how does this work? So getting back to Dino Kraspedon, the famous Brazilian mathematician who said that God is a set of mutually perpendicular lines of force oscillating upon themselves. So oscillating means that they have a vibration, which means they have a frequency. but they oscillate on themselves at perpendicular lines. So the difference between the x-axis and the y-axis is they come from the same point and they go perpendicular to each other. But then to maintain the structure, they have to come back together again. And so they can't come at the same line. They have to travel a different line and then come together. So we find that every time they change the angle on their dimension, they increase the energy, which is to say, if we look at two dimensions in a straight line, it's negative. At the points, the connector is the positive, the straight edge is the positive. But if we put a bend in that straight edge, well, now we've created hydrogen on one side and oxygen on the other side. And so that bending actually creates more energy. And so we find that this becomes part of the charge connection, what we call the x-axis transmission, because understanding that opposite charges attract, so we create this pathway, and it goes negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, and negative to its final destination. And so this becomes automatic. You don't need to voltmeter to figure that out. But if we were to have a second transition zone and it follows a different path, we find that there's a charge connection. So now we have a question, can one charge attract two? Because we start with one charge and it splits up. And then we get to the other end and we have one charge and it comes together. So understanding that it's a two-way street, we can have a splitting and a coming together. So just like the pH, we can split between acid and alkalinity, but when they come together, the total is 14. And so we see that, and this is how the amino acids link up to produce fatty acids. So they create a chain, and this chain is folding. What we're looking at is in a two-dimensional folding, but actually it's a spiral. And so in the process of rotating and going through the transmission process, to maintain that transmission, it has to stay on the same level. So it goes through the rotation. And if you look at it from a two-dimensional aspect, it looks like just bends in the road. And so we see that the different fatty acids have different bends in the road. And so not only do some have more and some have less, but some have a bend one way and some have a bend another way. And these are all fatty acids. Well, so fatty acids themselves is a family of fatty acids. So another generic term. So what's missing here is how do we differentiate between all of these fatty acids? So something is happening to bring the energy in, and in the process of bringing the energy in, it decides which way it's going to fold. And it has to fold because the amino acids cannot maintain their structure beyond the chain of 3. Once you get beyond that, then they fold over. So we see that these are all, in this case, 18 links in the chain. So they have to fold over. And they fold over along the way. But along the way, they fold again. So not only do we have a wave in the road, but then we have a bend in the road. So these are unaccounted for. And we know that there is a bend in the road because we saw with the pH change, the deflection of the DNA. The more unhealthy the terrain of the body, which is basically the pH of the blood serum, in the body, we find that the flatter the DNA, and the flatter the DNA, the poorer the communication, and the poorer the communication, the more unhealthy, until you come to the point, well, there's no communication. That communication is severed. And so interestingly enough, when we take the DNA, it eventually gets into the cellular structure, and then the cells become bigger structures. And so we find that there's a tightening and in the twisting, and there's a coiling, and there's a tunneling. And so all of these energy packs are coming in. And so where are these energy packs coming from? Well, it's going back to this electron shearing. So we create hydrogen energy, and then we create a hydroxyl. And so that is an energy pack, and it's in motion. But it's not one energy pack. It's two energy packs, both of which are positive. But the charge in motion, one is positive and one is negative. And so we see that when we apply this to sugar energy, and we see that there's a hexagonal gravitational format and a pentagonal magnetical format of the sugar, and then there's a crossover of the interaction of the hydrogen and the hydroxyl. So since the hydrogen and hydroxyl split up, and the combination is a balance seeking function. So it wants to balance off. So the hydrogen is seeking the hydroxyl on one side, and the hydrogen on the other side is seeking the hydroxyl on the first side. And in that process, there's a twisting. And since this is an ongoing process, in other words, there's energy in motion, so that means there's an on and off. And during that on and off period, there's a frequency, right? On and off is a frequency. Isn't that how computers work? So in that process, it causes this twisting. And at that point, the twisting continues. And at that point, the twisting continues. And at that point, the twisting continues. And so you get this roundness. You get this spiral. You get this tunneling. You get this shape. And so as we discussed some of the RNA history and how that it followed up the DNA history, and the thing about this is that these studies on viral RNA replication had to do with physicality. But nowhere was it discussed in terms of what facilitated the folding. But we did find out that the single folded polypeptide chain had to have different viruses in terms of their asymmetric structure. So when these three come together, there's no accounting as why they're different. It's just that when they come together, they have a different orientation. And because of that, we have multiple virus foldings. So if we understand that the points are negative and the flats are positive, and then we can see that clearly, that when we bring them together, they don't always line up. So they have to move to accommodate, right? So there has to be a folding deviation. And in that process, they create a pattern. And then that pattern creates a subunit. And then that creates another pattern. And so it goes. And so it goes. So we find that when we're discussing the RNA to DNA paths, we find that different viruses affect their DNA. And if we look at our DNA as being physical, and if we look at the RNA as being physical, and then we look at the viruses as being a physical adaptation, and this is how allopathic medicine is aligned. We have the filterable bacteriologist and the non-filterable virologists, and this is the modern studying. And so we say that with the RNA is part of the feeding state, and the mRNA is part of the feedback state. And so our DNA is part of the mattergen state, which is spread from the RNA, but adapts to the mRNA because we have different environments on this planet. Some places are hot, some places are cold, some places are humid, and some places are arid. So we adapt accordingly. And in fact, we go beyond that. Some places people are dark skinned, and some places people are white skinned. And then we have different nationalities, and we have all these varieties. So when we talk about the basic DNA, the thing that we find is that the DNA is the same in all the cells in our body. But my DNA is not the same as your DNA. There is a difference. But the DNA in all the cells in our body are the same. So the DNA does not account for the folding because I have a right thumb and I have a left thumb and they're opposing. And I have a left lung and a right lung and a left foot and a right foot, and heads and toes. So there's no accounting for that in the DNA, is there? So somehow these things are folded, and so we need to have this viral difference, right? That's what it is. So we have to have this folding transmission. So in other words, once you have the structure of the folding, from then it continues. So it cannot occupy the same position. It has to move to another position. So the motion of folding remains, but the position changes. And once that is done, well, you can't go back. You have to carry on. So in this process, the folding creates the manifestation. And then from there, the additional folding creates a change in positioning. And so we can see how we can get the beginning of the rotation through the motion of folding positioning. And we still have the same 3 viruses. Well, that's fine for this folding, but it doesn't account for the fact that I have a liver and a heart and a brain and a nose and some toes and a spleen and all these other things. But that's another subject. What we have is we've solved a particular anomaly, and now we find that the transmission along the basis x-axis, we can have this motion through this sine wave. But when we start to look at the pH and how it goes up the stairway and gets higher and higher, we find that we can go higher within 1 pH because it's an order of magnitude. So we can go from 5 to 6 and come to the top. And then we come to that extreme level. And that's where our problem is. How do we get to 6? So we have to jump off. There is a gap, isn't there? Well, why would I want to jump off when I have a MAGRAV condition? I have a point of containment. I have a balance between the acidic level of 5 and the alkaline level of 9, 9 and 5 being 14. So I have to, in order to achieve this, I have to have this transition of the x-axis. But when I get to this higher energy level, I have these gaps. Gap between 5 and 6, a gap between 6 and 7, a gap between 7 and 8. Well, wait a second. How do I get across this gap? So at least we understand the folding deviation. We've resolved that because it's done by pH selection, right? So that gives you a standard deviation. So if you choose a pH of 5, you'll get an equal and opposite pH of 9. So therefore, the viruses are also generic. And so different viruses have different folding. And different folding creates different organs. So we have accounted for that deviation and resolved that, but we can't account for the energy required to do that. So let's look at this closer and see that if we see that the x-axis transition follows a path, each pH has the same path. Wait a second. That still doesn't account for the difference. So the thing about it is that if we're just working on the basic transmission on the ground, we have a straight line. But if we get up, we have these gaps, kind of like the rings of Saturn. We have these rings, but between the rings are gaps. So are we on a ring or are we in the gap, and how do we jump that gap? So do we have enough energy to do that? So we have to change the range. We have to have a range transition. But wait a second. The range is the same within the pH, isn't it? Because we have a splitting and we have a coming together. We decided that. And so the action of the splitting and coming together is pH specific. So in other words, if we have a splitting on the 5, we'll get a splitting on the 9. 9 and 5 is 14. It's not 6 and 8. Maybe we have to increase the range. Yeah. Maybe we have to see the unseen. We maybe have to see that there's something else that is causing a change. So when we say why is not the question, why is the answer. 5 is 5, 7 is 7, 8 is 8, that's why. So what causes that? There has to be another range of the transition that we're not taking into account. So we can account for a difference in pH, but we cannot account for bridging the gap. So when we say water is just water, well, water creation goes through various levels of transition. So in its liquid form, we have wave transmission. In its chemical form, we have pH transmission. But the water in its pH transmission gives off a hydrogen and becomes a negative charge and leaves a water which is positive. The negative gives, the positive takes. That's the negative charge principle. the energy can be flowing or it can be binding. So the charge is really just a direction. So when we're talking about energy packs, we have to talk about charge gradients or gradient charges. In other words, the difference in the gradient is the charge, but the gradient charge is the difference in strength. And so this affects the lifespan. And we see how it affects bacteria and viruses, where we find by changing the pH of the terrain, we not only can change bacteria from being aerobic to anaerobic, but we can also change bacteria to viruses. And Gassenasons did this 40 times in a row. And so we find that the bacteria is manifested through the aerobic or anaerobic interaction, etc., whereas the viruses depend on a host and can transmit from host to host if it's alive. So the host manifestation is due to the folding, causes energy depletion. So the host manifestation causes energy absorption. The creation of the host and its manifestation and the absorption of energy consumes energy, and that's why it gets depleted. And so the manifestation of the physicality is at the lowest energy level. Why? Because to arrive at that level, the energy was consumed. And then, of course, you have these extremes, this folding deviation, where the deviation can lead to degeneration on one side, or the repulsion can end up being revulsion. Both extremes, but not the same. One is magnetical, which lacks absorption, and one is gravitational, which becomes more gravitational through the folding decay. So how do we undo that? So we have to have a range transition modification, because that supersedes genetic modification, you see. So that becomes a conditional effect, but an unconditional targets. Let me paraphrase that. The soul regulates all the cells in the body, whether it's the heart, the brain, the nose, or the toes. It doesn't play favorites. It gives unconditionally. The sun does the same thing. It shines on everybody. It shines on all the plants. It shines on the earth unconditionally. So when we look at our feedback summary, we find that we're dependent on sound, light, heat, pressure, fascinated by the luster, contributes to the superficiality. And then we see that we have this laminar containment and gaps in between. And so this transmission has to go through a dimension of transition, because someplace we see something and someplace we don't. And we are feedback dominant. And that dominance is extended by man-made range deviation, where we forget the creation made. And so we rest on this potentiation of fear. And we see that the terrorist fearing is man-made, and the God fearing is God-made. Two extremes. It doesn't work. It's an anomaly. So if our wish is for freedom, love, and world peace, we have to do it the way the creation does it, with freedom, love, and world peace. or freedom, love, and universal peace. So it's not God-fearing, it's God-made, because God-made is fearless, it's complex, it's stable, and it's gravitational. And in order to maintain its stability, and in order to be able to move, it has to have a magnetical characteristic. And so it has to be able to give. And you have to give in order to receive. And so there's a giving and taking and a giving and taking. This is all part of the transmission spectrum. But there's a non-visible viral spectrum orbital. And what we see is the transition of visible transmission spectrums. And so each level has a gap, and there's a spectrum to spectrum susceptibility. So what we see is this surface superficiality, and what we don't see is this internal substance. This internal substance is the plasma substrate of the physical substance, this point of containment. And whatever that point of containment, there's always one step beyond in either direction. So none of this accounts for being able to take one step beyond. It's just there. What we're focused on is our feedback and our point of containment. And what we don't understand is that in order to have this transmission within our field, this communication antenna that we have has to stay within this range transition. And in order to stay within that transition, we have to understand that the binding energy has to be released, and that precedes the retrieval of the beneficial energy. So in other words, it's not that we discard, it's just that we give the energy that we don't need and retrieve the energy that we do need, understanding that the energy that we do need comes from some other field that is releasing the binding energy that it doesn't need. In other words, the field release precedes the field capture, the giving precedes the taking, and the emission precedes the absorption. And it is this activity which causes motion. Motion cannot exist without the coexistence, because motion is a product of existence. Motion and coexistence reside in both matter states. So, are we plasma dominant or are we physical dominant? So we have to tune our plasma dominance because that precedes our physical dominance and hence our tuning. So when we discuss range transition, we have to discuss that by nearness and proximity and not distance. You don't measure nearness and proximity by distance. You only measure the speed by distance. So when we're looking at these dimension orbitals, we say that, the world revolves around you. Well, no, we are not man-space centric. And we used to be Earth space centric. Well, we're not Earth space centric either. And some civilizations said, well, we were sun space centric. Well, there's debate on that as well. What we do know is that the containment of the dimension is dimension centric. And so proximity to that dimension is dimension centric. And the nature of pressure in that proximity is dimension centric. But 3 transmission dimensions are required. And so when you have a capability of transmitting, then the question is, what's the message? And how is that message contained? And which transmission dimension is in the folding deviation? So we find that the accountability is range transition centric. The accountability includes what you have and what you can see, and what you have and you can't see. Understanding that whether you can see it or not, you have it. And so the accountability has to stay within that range. You have to take all of that into account. Now you understand the work of the Universal Body Enhancement Spaceship Units. We're talking about food energy delivery, drug energy delivery, addiction energy delivery. This is the message delivery by a messenger, energy delivery by transmission selection. And this selection delivery is done without intermediaries through standard folding deviation, the way it was intended. It changes the range transition criteria, expands it, and is including and inclusive of the visible and non-visible energy fields, which account for the difference between things that we see that are man-made or understanding the role of man in the whole picture. That's the same difference like we see between the vertical enhancement units and the horizontal enhancement units. So what is our target? We have to practice. We have to be sharpshooters to understand that the difference between materialization and dematerialization, which is actually the reality dimension, is a balance between the gravitational and magnetical field forces. And so those forces take us from all different levels, from the Earth space gravitational forces to that magnetical subspace, which is also gravitational because it's seeking the balance and is drawing the magnetical forces. So this is what we give. And in the process of giving, then what do we take? Well, we have to take these forces that are coming from outer space. So we better be practicing our target shooting and understand that the matter plasma dimensions are either in the physical state or in the plasmatic state, but they work together. The plasmatic state is doing the feeding, the physical state is the feedback. So if you want to know how well you're doing, well, sure, we'll look at the feedback, analyze it, and say, things are not going the way I planned. Well, you have to change what you're doing, or you have to change the plan. Maybe you're not listening to the soul plan. Maybe we are too feedback dominant. So get that antenna fixed. Understand the message feeding manifestation and how it relates to the message feedback manifestation. This facilitates the transmission tuning and transition. So we understand that the selection of one is balanced by the forced selection of another, and the resulting selections feed manifestation. And the selection manifestation is predetermined by selected choices of intention. Oh, who did the intending? And when did you make these choices? And when did you decide to stop following that path? So we find that this range transition affects our standard folding deviation, doesn't it? So now we understand why the Kesh Foundation has launched the first Kesh Space Plasma Research Teams program, because we're just beginning to understand that the way we operate on this planet is not the way the universe operates. Except that life is for learning. And so now, being in the post-March 15th, 2024 era of choices, we have a new selection process. And so we can understand that bountiful space we call Earth space, and that transmutation of space we call outer space. And that is only possible to have heaven on earth and understand the process of the universe by helping our graceful inner space and understanding the greater oneness, as we've tried for 537 weeks in a row in the Knowledge Seekers workshops to explain how we transcend the limitations of nuclear science, because the plasma science is of a higher energy state than the nuclear science. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers, learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. We need a world peace treaty because that's how we get to have the new technology. We have to sign it, and sign it meaningfully with a pen, with our intention, with our soul, and with honor. So is man the reactor of a three-dimensional universe? You bet. And can man find heaven through the field transition? You bet. Can man go into outer space without any slip-ups? We need to practice some more. To mind the orbitals of the three dimensions of truth, but staying within range of standard deviation. We select the specific message range of transition in various physical transmission dimensions. And that's why the plasma science needs to continue to be delivered daily in exchange for peace on Earth. What else is there to do? So welcome to the new outer space age. That's the end of this lesson. Thank you very much for allowing me to present. Back to you, Mark.
And thank you, Alex, for your continued sharing of the knowledge. Let's see if there's anyone in the participants who would like to ask a question or make a comment or take an exception to perhaps what Alex is saying here. I'm fully not getting the, if you pick a 9, you have to have a 5, but we'll save that for another point, perhaps in the discussion. Interesting, Mr. Keshe has said that you'll find viruses in space, or what he referred to as energy packs, but he said you won't find any bacteria in space. So how come we find energy packs within our universe, within our body, and we know we have a better vacuum condition than outer space, or pretty much similar to that? How come the bacteria can live within our universe, but they can't live within the greater universe? If that is something you'd like to address.
What a brilliant question. So getting back to the pH scale.
Oh, do you have to go there? No, I do need to understand this, Alex. I'm really not picking up as much as I should on this pH, but go ahead and please continue.
Alkalinity is aerobic because it's loaded with oxygen. Acidity is anaerobic. If the hydrogen leaves, the oxygen has to leave. Because in order to create water, you need both. So if you remove the one, you remove the other. It has to be. It's like a horse and carriage, you know, they go together. Like love and marriage, you know. You have to have it. So how much do you have? Well, if it's a pH of 14, you have a lot. You have a high potential. But if it's pH of 1, well, you don't have much at all. And so when we look at the nanocoating process, it's highly alkaline, where you're using a sodium hydroxide, which is a pH of 14. But if you're digesting food, you have oxalic acid, which is around a pH of 1.4 or something like that, which is extremely acidic, and it's inside your stomach. When you understand that soft drinks, have a pH of 2.4, and we joke about it, it'll peel the paint off your car. Well, if it'll peel the paint off your car, would you want to drink that? Well, a lot of people do. And they like the fizziness. Well, what's happening with the fizziness? Well, the fizziness is the release of hydrogen. So that's what it causes the acidity, 2.4, which is an order of magnitude higher than oxalic acid. So does the drinking of soda pop help you digest food? Well, if you have an acidic condition in your stomach, then why would you secrete the enzymes to create an acidic condition in your stomach? What you're going to want to do is to create an alkaline situation in your stomach to offset, aren't you? To balance it off, to balance off the pH. So why do we secrete oxalic acid in our stomach? To balance off the food that we're eating. That food that we're eating is in a highly gravitational state. So we want to break it down into a magnetical state that we can absorb plasmatically into our body. When we absorb that into our body, then if you're eating cow meat, you don't have any organs in your body that resemble any part of the cow. So we have to convert the cow meat energy into man meat energy, if you will. And so if you understand that process and what we discussed last week, what is the difference between cow milk and mother's milk? Well, the notion that mother's milk is bad for children and cow's milk is good is really strange. So, we have to understand that the energy in one format is tuned to that format. And so when we use something in its wrong context, then, don't be surprised when it doesn't work in an optimal level. So this is where we insist on doing something that is against, shall we say, normal procedures. So we have to be able to understand how energy is exchanged, and if that energy that we are presented with is not suitable, then we either have to discard it or we have to change it, or a combination of both. So, you have a loaf of bread, but it's in the form of a dough. You put it in the oven and you bake it, and now it's bread, and now it's delicious. What have you done? You've imparted more energy and changed the nature of that dough. So this is just what it is the exchange of energy. That energy that was in the oven went somewhere. It was consumed. And so we've seen not only did it go into the bread, but there was a yeast in the bread. And so the dough changed its shape, changed its shape. It went from being a fat blob to being a nice fluffy bread. Why? Because of the yeast. It was part of the fermentation process. The fermentation process is a manifestation of the bacteria, and it has to decide if it's going to be aerobic or anaerobic. And that is the criteria. So it's hinged on oxygen. Oxygen is a manifestation of the gravitational field forces of this planet. That's why. So you'll see the bacteria here in that format. Without this oxygen, it is strictly viral. And when it's viral, you can transmute. How's that for an answer?
Long and cumbersome for me. I wanted a short and sweet answer. But what about the bacteria? Addressing that question about why can it survive, can't survive in the universe, which is in a vacuum condition, but it can survive in our universe within our structure, even though that's also.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
It's because of the oxygen. The criteria for the manifestation of bacteria is oxygen dependent. See, while we're processing that food, it's the bacteria that facilitates the breakdown of that food. And the bacteria facilitates our living, okay, because it's aerobic. The moment we die, we become anaerobic, okay? We stop breathing, we stop producing oxygen within our body. So that bacteria then becomes anaerobic. And that is the same bacteria that used to be aerobic. It now just changes personality. So instead of working to keep you alive, then it decomposes you. And as I mentioned before, you know, roadkill on the highway before the cleanup crews pick it up will disintegrate in 9 days. Why? Because the aerobic bacteria becomes anaerobic, and so instead of life-giving, it eats the protein of the body and dissolves it completely. What happens to the bacteria at that point? Well, it just disintegrates. It completely depletes its energy because it no longer is fed. See, the whole purpose of the bacteria is as a digestion. So if it has nothing to digest, then it doesn't exist anymore. So it's all hinged on the oxygen, and its personality is determined according to that. So it'll provide life or it'll decompose the physicality. And then it'll fulfill its functionality. And at that point, it has to leave. And it leaves in the form of the virus, which is the original source. We don't have oxygen in space. We don't have oxygen in between space, and we don't have oxygen in outer space. We only have energy. So without oxygen, we don't have bacteria.
Okay, I think I'm understanding that. Thank you.
You cannot have bacteria without oxygen.
Okay. So when Mr. Kesh says we don't need to breathe, which you can provide the fields of oxygen and you'd absorb it, but it would still go into your body and the bacteria would still have access to it.
In the physicality.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. So even if you weren't breathing and just absorbing from the fields, the bacteria would still be able to survive. And as you say, we need it. The intestine is full of all kinds of flora, as they say.
Precisely.
Oh, okie dokie.
I think you're getting it, Mark.
Yeah, well, hopefully this century. We still have a lot of time to go, so I may be able to absorb more by the end of it. Anyone else want to raise a question or make a comment or take exception? As I said, this creates a point of creation when we have two fields sort of rubbing against each other.
Do you remember when, do you remember Popeye the Sailor, the cartoon?
Uh-huh,
He ate spinach and
he
you saw
did.
when yeah, and you saw the energy go into his arms. I
Yeah.
envisioned, I envisioned the spinach going into his arms and giving him energy. So, you know, I'd eat my spinach.
Yeah,
But then
he must have been paid by the food companies or something.
okay, well, that's another subject.
Yeah,
But, you know,
right.
I cut myself and my blood was red. And I thought, well, wait a second, I'm eating this spinach and it's giving me energy. How come my blood is red and not green? Okay, because even though I was a kid, you know, I couldn't resolve that anomaly, but, you know, I knew very well that, you know, despite the color of the spinach, my blood was of a different color. I just, you know, I would ask people the question, and of course, they would kind of look at me like I was crazy just because they didn't have an answer. So I was stupid for asking the question. You know, they weren't stupid for not being able to answer the question, but I mean, you ask scientists the same reason, you know, and so one of the reasons is because of the iron, and when the iron comes in contact with the oxygen, then it turns red. Yeah, but what about the spinach? What happened to the spinach? It was green. What happened to that? What about chocolate cake? How come if I eat chocolate cake, my blood is not chocolate? You know, or vanilla ice cream, or cherry cheesecake? Are you getting hungry? You know, you eat all these foods and the blood is still red. It's always the same color. It just, you know, what changes color? Hmm. Well, urine changes color. Oh, what causes that? So we find that the color of the urine reflects what is in the urine and what is, shall we say, created or what is discarded, isn't it? So I I've seen every color of my urine, everything from a kind of a dark to almost a clear.
Mhm.
And you know what? It was definitely a reflection of my health.
Have you paused?
Yeah, yeah, I paused. I was just waiting for you to make another dramatic statement.
He was having a piece of cheesecake to change his blood.
All righty. Anyone else with a question? Maybe we can have some
To
good
something
questions. Yes.
that Alex said earlier in one of his diagrams about the DNA, and it's changing its shape as the acidity level gets higher and higher and higher and higher in the blood. The skin turns gray because the fungus that's inside the body that's literally eating itself is literally taking your life force energy away. Would you not agree?
Alex?
Well, I agree. I agree. So the more alkaline the terrain in your body is, the more anaerobic it is. And you know, when you're anaerobic, that bacteria has now changed. Instead of keeping you alive, it is now consuming you. Okay, well, there's a statement. The bacteria consumes the food that you eat in an aerobic alkaline state, but you can't digest the food that you eat when you're in an anaerobic state. So the bacteria then consumes you, digests you. what was astounding to me was, first of all, this relationship of the DNA transcription. So the actual wave, so clearly, I think you can see that when you're in an alkaline state, you have more waves per inch, let's say, by distance. So you have a higher frequency, don't you? So, the healthy state has a higher frequency than the dead state. The dead state is flatlining, so there's no frequency. What is outstanding is that this range is from a pH of 7.3 to 7.46. In that case, and we're talking about the blood, above 7 is alkaline. So even though at 7.3, we could be slightly alkaline, as far as the blood is concerned, it's highly acidic. And that is related to the production of energy. And so when we talk about energy, we have to talk about sugar.
Mr. Kesh called it salinity. We can change the salinity. I don't see how that's connected to pH, or is he using salinity as a word for pH?
Yes, he is.
Okay.
Because the range for the healthy blood serum is in the mid sevens, but the range for the body goes from 1 to 14.
Yeah, and isn't that interesting? I used to be in the laundry business, and the final process in laundering, I mean commercial type things, it doesn't matter your home as well, but you want to use a sour, what they call an acidic end result mixed in with your softener. And because if you put the wide range indicator on your skin, your outer layer of your skin, you'll see it's about a 5.5 pH. And when you don't rinse out all the alkalinity that you're using in washing, most detergents have some, you have an interaction between the higher pH in the linen and the lower pH on the skin. You get that like little bugs are biting you or something. You're getting that itching. And this is why, especially in a hospital situation, you want to have the linen, because it's in contact with the skin so much. You're laying on the sheets and the rest of it. But you're ending up with an acid condition. And if you were alkaline, why would the skin appear to be a 5.5 pH on the outer layer? And anyone can take a wide range indicator and just drop a couple drops, and you'll see, you'll come up with an orange, I'd say orange color, probably 9.9 out of 10 times. Just another one of these little anomalies.
No, it's a perfectly good question, and the perfectly good answer is that inside your body you are alkaline. So the outside of your body, which is highly physical, is acidic.
And that doesn't account for the 50,000 different kinds of bacteria living on the outside of your skin either.
Well, each one, it's an order of magnitude. Okay, it's a logarithmic scale. Just a change in 3 decimal places on the logarithmic scale is a radical change. So each bacteria lives within its own range. See, for instance, why does it take 6 weeks to generate the beneficial bacteria within a body of water? Okay, because one bacteria becomes a precursor for another bacteria. Well, so what do you mean by it becomes a precursor? Well, because once you create that one bacteria, then the next bacteria goes from there. So if you remember this slide, once you have created this bacteria, which is a physical manifestation, now the next bacteria can no longer assume that position. And that bacteria is a direct descendant of the viral positioning. So by changing the viral positioning, you're now changing the bacteria. So the next bacteria then actually consumes the first bacteria. So it actually gets rid of that bacteria and becomes another bacteria. Now that you've created a new position, now you've created the environment to attract another bacteria. So the virus hasn't changed, it's just the viral positioning has changed and the bacteria manifests itself differently. If there's a positioning change, then there's a bacteria change. And so you have to go through these many levels. So one of the things that is necessary for methane production, of course, in terms of the physical decomposition, say of a landfill, and then if you've seen a landfill, you know that they have these chimney stacks where the hydrogen is emitted up the chimney, and the people who tend to the landfill have to make sure that the flame is lit, because otherwise you would create an explosive condition. So the methane gas is continually being produced inside the landfill. And what is that? Well, that's a decomposition of the landfill, which is facilitated by the bacteria, right? So there is no aerobic creation. What are you creating? Well, you're creating CH4. Oh, there's no oxygen there. It's all hydrogen. The decomposition of the landfill is all hydrogen, and the oxygen gets released. So it's anaerobic. The whole digestion process is anaerobic. So they have to maintain that flame. The thing that is astounding to me, or the learning from the knowledge seekers workshops for me, was that this hydrogen or methane, if you will, that is being burned off is in a physical state because there's a physical flame. There is a plasmatic hydrogen. And we know that because we can create the GANs of methane. And the methane is in the plasma state of a higher energy level. So at that point in time, it isn't just that you don't go from solid to liquid to gas to GANs. That's not what happens. These are all different energy states. So you go from physicality to monatomic, or you go atomic, monatomic to GANs to plasma state. So we find that even though the GANs is in a plasma state, we don't digest the GANs, okay, because it's too strong and it's physical. We have GANs in our bodies, so don't eat the GANs. We use the GANs to create the energy. We eat the food, which is a lower energy, interact with the GANs to create the higher energy that we need for life. And how much higher do we need? Well, you compare the energy that's inside a hamburger and compare the energy of 18 Hiroshima bombs, and you know the difference. Many, many orders of magnitude. So we take in nature 6 weeks to produce the beneficial bacteria to create an aerobic condition in the water so that plants can live, fish can live. So if you want to have a garden in your backyard, unless you seed it with beneficial bacteria, it'll take you naturally about 6 weeks to develop the beneficial bacteria, because one bacteria is a precursor for the next. Okay, well, that's fine. So how long does it take to produce methane? Well, it takes a while. You put it in a landfill and you can take it and produce it for a while. So I worked for an organization that was able to produce it in 5 hours. And the reason we were able to produce it because we developed an ideal environment for bacteria. It didn't take 6 weeks. We produced it in 5 hours. So when Mr. Kesh says that he can produce a methane generator with gas on demand, yeah, I believe him.
And what a gift to the Chinese government. You would think the smaller governments would have picked up on it and started using it immediately because, as I said, they spent $20 billion in 4 months or something on purchasing methane from other countries. You would think that this is, maybe it is under consideration. But a smaller government would say, wow, we can power the entire country. Of course, as Mr. Kesh said, it was more a space fuel than for burning, but I think we can still burn it as well. This seems to be what the generator is all about, an electric generator powered by the methane gas created out of the fields.
The creation of that energy is a burning, so it's at the lowest energy level. It's when we use the methane at the higher energy level, then that becomes part of the spaceship program. But you know, getting back to your point with respect to China, the method that they use to create energy is affecting the health of the population. So there's an astronomical penalty on the health of the Chinese population.
You mean the coal? And the other,
they are the worst polluters in the world. Okay, so they have the highest requirement, regardless of what our fearless leader says. The Canadians are the worst polluters. We are declared the worst polluters in the world, so that we can pay the highest in carbon
I've
credit.
never heard that. Never
Yes,
heard that.
Yeah, Canada is the worst. We have the highest carbon footprint of any nation in the world.
With such a meager population.
Well, because of the mathematical figures are skewed, right? You have a big country with a small population, so whatever our carbon footprint is on a per capita basis, it is massive.
Okay.
Yeah, but you know, they don't explain how they arrive at the figure. They just say, well, because Canada is such a massive polluter, then we as the taxpayers have to pay at the gas pumps for carbon tax. That's as political as I'm going to get.
Anyone else want to make a statement or bring a comment? Ed, if you're here, I don't know if you want to explain that CH4 the way you explained it to me earlier. Mr. Kesh's statement at the Sanya conference about the space fuel. He may not be able to open his mic, no problem. I think it's the cosmic rays that we don't understand fully, which is part of the limiting factor, Alex, for us developing any sort of devices. I think this is a key. As he said, there's secret technologies or technologies that we're not aware of yet, and this is why some of their systems work and our systems don't seem to work as well. A far cry in a way, because we haven't understood the work of the cosmic rays or these creator rays, these energies.
Well, so you have to understand that you absorb what you are. You and I are different. So the energy that you absorb is different. the energy coming with the cosmic rays is unconditional. You're the one who decides. You're the condition seeker. And in the universal order of things, it's seeking balance.
Okay, well, you mentioned about the soul, and we're all carrying all the knowledge. I've decided I'm asking my soul to reveal more knowledge to me or enlightenment, but why does it have to be put into that position in a way? I know it has its own life, a secret life, and the rest of it doesn't need the physicality to exist. But why, you would think, if it's such a giver, it would communicate somehow through emotions or feelings or whatever, some of this knowledge to the physicality without even hiding itself from the physicality. I mean, we agreed with the religions and everything like that. The soul was somewhere out there, maybe in the Eastern persuasions. They had a different view. They went inside, but why does the soul seem to be so elusive in a way, even to the point that you don't even want to bring it up in mixed company? What could you possibly know about the soul? Nobody understands it. But why is it, in a way, hiding itself? Or is it not hiding itself from our awareness in the physicality of its existence? And as Mr. Kesh said, the physicality follows the totality, which the soul is. So how can we open this knowledge up, since we're carrying it all? Again, maybe the thinking good, speaking good, and doing good is part of the prerequisite to getting the soul to share some of this understanding?
You're amazing. You're amazing.
No, I'm Mark.
You ask 3 questions and you answer 4. That's I really don't know what to say, except that this. So, you are a product of the creator. Agreed? Hello, Mark. Are you a product of the
Yes.
creator? Or you're a product?
Yeah. Is the physicality a product of the creator, or is the soul the product of the creator?
Well, yeah, but by extension. Okay, by
Okay,
extension.
let's say the whole kit and
Yeah,
caboodle.
you, Mark. Yeah, you, the kit in the caboodle called Mark. Okay, you're the product of the creator, right? So everybody on this panel is the product of the creator. Do you agree with that statement?
Oh, everything. Yes.
Okay, so do you think the creator is playing favorites?
I highly doubt that.
I,
Although man
oh,
has been chosen, and the universal community is a little bit envious that we've been gifted this knowledge of transmutation. So is the creator playing favorites there?
it all has to do with nearness and proximity, Mark. We are in a position of nearness and proximity that they are not. How about that?
So you say.
Okay, well, the point of the matter is, Mark, is that whatever you're wishing for in that regard is only one part of what the creator is giving. So the other 8 billion on this planet have to wish for the same thing because they make up the other parts of the whole. You're 1/8 billionth.
So this is the story or the theory about the collective awareness rising
Right,
up to the occasion.
right.
And when that tipping point happens, we'll all become more enlightened, let's say.
Well,
Or
we've hit
we'll
that
attract
tipping point.
higher level energies to the planet, and that will enlighten us, perhaps.
We've hit the tipping point. We're past the tipping point because Look at what's happened around. Look at the comments that people are making. I don't know what's going on, but I can feel something in the air. Well, you didn't hear that before, you know. No one would talk about that, you know. It's just that you get this strange feeling and you don't know why. So then as you look, you know, if you're a researcher, you don't ever want to find that out because you're a career researcher. So right away, you know, you put a blockage in. But the rest of us, you know, we don't care about that. We don't have to guard our position. You know, we don't have to say, well, you know, this is me and this is who I am. And, you know, if we change, you know, I'm going to lose everything that I am. There are a few people who are going to lose everything, and they're in the severe minority. The rest of us, uh, well, relation wise, relatively speaking, we don't have, you know, the same amount. So, what do they say that 99% of the Earth's wealth is retained by 1% of the population? Say something extreme like that, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So the rest of us are part of that 99%, and regardless of how much money we have, and this is what I tell people, you know, especially people who are freaks in health food and stuff like that, and they say, "Oh, I want to eat healthy. I want to eat healthy." Well, there is not a single store in my community that you can go and buy healthy food. Doesn't exist. So if a store doesn't exist, then you don't have enough money to buy healthy food. Okay? So now you're faced with the prospect, you either eat or don't eat. So don't tell me you don't know how carefully you're reading the label. Okay, it doesn't matter what's on the label because no one's checking, you know. So eat the food you like the food you eat, and take the energy that you need and give the rest. That's how we do it. If we don't do it that way, then you will not be able to function in this society, you know, because if you wanted to, you know, limit yourself to, I'm only going to deal with people who talk good, think good, and do good, you could end up being very lonely. You know, you could be end up like a lot of these mass murderers who want to go into outer space, you know. Everyone can see the soul and they will know who you are. You can't lie, cheat, or steal. So they will avoid you. They won't fight you. They'll just avoid you because the universe is a peaceful, benevolent place. And if you're not a peaceful, benevolent person, you cannot engage with the universe. So there's the penalty. They say, well, okay, I don't want that. I'm just going to stay here and I'm going to make life miserable for everybody else. Well, we've crossed that tipping point. Okay. We now have our intention as directed from the Creator to create heaven on earth. And so please rest assured that we will.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I do agree with you. But again, it may not come in my generation, perhaps. We
No,
may
it will.
just,
It will. Absolutely.
I mean, the list is just phenomenal about retrofitting the Tesla cars, the wellness centers, the remote feeding, the CH4, converting amino acids, cosmic ray material, gold amino acids, material enhancement. I mean, the list keeps growing. I think he added on agriculture improvements. And now I'm going to, at the end, they're about 15 minutes. It's a 10-minute clip about this. He wants it in the hand of every woman in the next number of a handful of months. He said this ability to deal with a breast situation, perhaps. So these gifts are just phenomenal. And the list is building and building and building. And there's probably many things in the background we're not even aware of at this point in time. The vertical units and solving the situation for the beautiful people. I mean, the list is getting quite long.
Yeah, but you're looking at the magnetical aspects. You have to look at the core issue. The core issue is understanding the technology and understanding that your essence is yours, and your essence came from the Creator. So once you understand that, once you have an orientation, then everything else follows. So you don't need to know everything. You just need to understand the rules of the game.
Or I need to know it when I need it.
Well, you will know what you
As
need
he
it.
said,
because,
with the technology, you know, you don't need it all the time. You use it when you do need it. You get burned, you spray the CO2. You have a Corona type problem, you make a cup. But you don't need it all the time. This is what he seemed to be indicating. You use it when you need it.
well, you don't see people walking around with a feed bag, okay? You're not, you know, well, you can go without eating for the duration of time, okay? So
sure.
it's not a matter, you say, well, I don't have food. Oh, well, I don't have food at this time, you know, but what are you doing in the meantime? So if your energy dependency is directly related to the food, then you're only getting the energy when you eat the food. And then in between, when you're getting the food, what, you're not getting the energy? Well, how do you move? How do you even sit? How do you think? How do you talk? Of course, you're getting the energy. So once you realize that, oh, you know what? I'm getting energy all the time. So it's just sometimes I can get more or I can get less energy. But interestingly enough, one of the things that I find now, because I used to eat 3 meals a day, I only eat 1 meal a day. I maybe munch on something, you know, during the course of the day, but it's significantly less than what it was before. So I'm saying my food intake is down about 70%. And so when I do eat, then the opposite happens. I consume a lot of energy to eat that food. So wait a second, I'm eating food because I need energy, and yet I'm depleting the energy in digesting the food. So what does that tell you? It tells you that I'm eating food as a habit. It's like smoking or
That's
drinking.
true. Yeah,
It's a
that's
habit.
true. I think he said you take in 2,500 calories, you're using 1,000 to 1,500 calories to convert it. So you're
Yeah.
getting much less out of it than you really think you are.
So I think I'm at the point now where uh, might it be possible, you know, to go down to 80%, you know, less. Uh, the problem that I'm facing, and this is my confession, is that I miss the enjoyment I get from eating food. I mean, you know, you look at I was never a very good cook. And I told a story. My one grandmother was a fantastic cook. And, you know, if you didn't like eating, man, if she was cooking, you know, you'd quit your fast. You'd quit your fast really fast. You know, you'd be wolfing it down because the food was fantastic. Whereas the other grandmother, she was a horrible cook, and you know, if I was living in that family and she was cooking, you know, I would give up eating. So honestly, it would be horrible. And say like, why aren't you eating? Well, you know, have you tasted the food? It's horrible. So why do you think people eat out? Why do you think people go to these food chains? Because of the nutrition? I doubt it. I sincerely doubt there's nutrition. Why do they spend millions of dollars in their kitchens trying to figure out a food that'll make it more attractive for you to eat? You
Yeah, I
know,
think they're playing on your taste buds rather than your health.
yeah, I made the mistake. I was living in a town that had a major meat producer, and a lot of friends who worked there. And there was this restaurant, and I like going there. I like the meat. It was simulation beef. So, beef on a bun and that type of stuff. And it was relatively cheap, and that's something that I needed at that time. So I was telling my friends, about that food, and they said, well, when we have a Christmas party, we bring out all the meat products that the factory produces. And we produce the meat that goes to this restaurant chain. And that's the only food out of all the food that's on the table, and there's like hundreds of different varieties of meat that they produce. This is the only one that nobody buys. I mean, it had a desirability index below hot dogs, which kind of figures because I liked hot dogs. But, don't tell me what's in them because so I finally cured myself. I
30% water, 30% salt, and whatever the rest is.
God knows. God knows. Yeah. Well, there's a company here that produces dog food that you don't know what is in there. And it's a crime, but we allow it. So the checks and balances that we have in our life have also been compromised. So that has to change. And who does the checks and balances? So we are the ones who are the chosen ones, and we are the ones who do the choosing. And so there are things that we can have control over and things that we cannot. So we need to stay within our range. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is act good, think good, and do good. Very simple.
Well, you're
Okay.
doing quite well with that sort of reduction. And I would imagine if you had access, if the Keshe Foundation offered a feeding program once, twice, or three times, or four times a week, or wherever you felt hungry, I think you'd probably cover most of the 20% we're short of.
Sure, and then I would adapt, wouldn't I?
Yep.
I would adapt to the new way of energy absorption, new to me anyway. So I would adapt to that and stop doing the other thing. So it's the same with the essential nutrients that we have as a baby. There's 11 essential nutrients and 10 as a child and 8 as an adult. So, this is one of the reasons adults have trouble drinking milk because milk on its own is an essential nutrient for a baby. So, but we don't need those essential nutrients as an adult. Say when you look at dehydroepiandrosterone, DHEA, the mother of all hormones, they say, we have a depletion of DHEA, and it's true. When they measure, your hormonal levels, we find that as we age, we have less and less, and so they they credit the DHEA as the fountain of youth, if you will. But the fact of the matter with hormones is they send signals that turn you on and off. So as a child, everything is growing, right? So everything needs to be turned on. But as an adult, you're not growing, you're maintaining. So you don't need to turn everything on. So you don't need to be flooded with DHEA. So what does that mean? That means the actual interpretation of the data is wrong. The amount of DHEA that we have is an overflow, is an abundance. And so what they're measuring is how much more there is than what we truly need. Whereas when we're adults, we only get what we need because we're just into the maintenance. And if we need more, it has to be then because we are consuming more, and we would be doing that by more physical activity through either exercise or through work. And so we consume more energy. But the hormonal structure would adapt accordingly, right? That's what the feedback in the physicality is all about. And so my point through this current series has been to emphasize our overdependence on the dominance of the feedback. We have to take into account the feeding. The feeding balances the feedback. That's the point. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Anyone else want to offer any questions? Add to the conversation? Join the
Yeah.
conversation? Who is it? Selena?
I was listening and I fall asleep a little bit.
That's okay. We all do. Your soul does not sleep. So the soul picked up the entire matter.
Yeah. Um, um, I, talking about the feeding, I have little bit confusion too. I try to understand how to live without eating. In my total life, like when I was young and to now, a lot of time I did eat a less, lot of time and a lot of time a lot. So when I used to eat less, I feel different things. Like I feel sleepy if I don't eat, and then it's not weak but lighter and sleepy, like not drowsy. It's different kinds of feelings. And then if I fall asleep that time, I can, if I try to woke up, I can. And that time I goes to places, different places. It's lighter places, maybe different dimension. I see a lot of stuff. I feel a lot of stuff. But in this place, in the now place, I can come back. So now I scare sometimes if I try to not to eat. I think if I go to bed or I go to sleep and then I'm not gonna be come back in here. Maybe I will go different places.
But that's only 50%. As Mr. Kesh said to one of the knowledge seekers, you just can't stop eating. You have to bring in energy on the other side. And this is perhaps where we're lacking in understanding of how to do that. But it's just not the stopping of the eating. At the same time, you have to absorb more energies from the universe to compensate for that. And this is a trick, or what we need to understand more of, how to bring more of that in. And maybe the feeding systems will, again, ingrain that within your physicality to learn how to do that. It'll teach the soul, in a way, how to do that without eating. But you just can't, the stopping the eating does not make you automatically absorb more energies into your system, as I understand it. We have to somehow move in that direction where we not only reduce the eating, but increase the absorption of the energies.
Yeah, but
from the environment or from the universe, as I understand it at this point.
Yeah. But other thing is, if we go other dimension, I see there is no hunger, there is no food. I didn't feel hungry in other places. It's good feelings, it's light feelings, no hunger. So
I think we asked that question once. Did anyone ever eat while they were dreaming, or went for a meal while you're in a dream state? I think we might have got 1 or 2 yeses, but for the most part, out of 10, 8 no's. They never experienced food or eating in the dream. Have you, Selena?
Yeah, I did. I did in sleep. Yeah, but other, it is. I did. If I see like kinds of condition, there is food, there is eating, but eat lighter places, no food. You don't need to eat. So I don't know where to do what, where. So I'm confused. And I know in the earth, whatever animal we are eating and what kinds of stuff we are eating us. Because I saw in myself in the slaughterhouse, in other body, other animal body, in the under the water, in the sky, in the clouds. So everything us, not other thing.
So we're
We are
eating the creator?
Yeah, we are recycling us different way. We are abusing. I always say we are abusing us, nothing else. I know. I know that if somebody say no, it is not. I don't believe, because I saw it. I feel it. It happened to me.
Right. As Alex said, all the energies come from the creator.
Yes, 100%.
Right. Alex said he's never dreamt of food. I never had a pizza in a dream or anything. I don't ever remember having any meals in any dreams. I don't know. But Selena has, as I said, I think about 2 out of 10 have said yes, they've had food in their dreams. But I don't remember eating anything in my dream, even if other people were eating. I do distinctly remember one dream that was like that. The others were at a picnic table in a way, or there were many tables in the room, but I was standing at the table. I wasn't eating.
I ate when it's the place like art, like normal, like here, then we eat. There is other place too. There is no hunger.
Did you ever dream of McDonald's in your dream going through the drive-through?
No, I didn't. I didn't.
No, I haven't either. Okay, so much to learn, as Mr. Kesh said. I thought we'd, is there anyone else, or Selena, do you want to add more? Are there any things you'd like to share more with us?
I don't want to say about the scary stuff.
Okay, good. Let's leave that then.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Yeah.
We're trying to add to the souls, not take away from them. But as we know, there's no bad knowledges. So however you feel about it is fine.
No, it's okay. I'm not gonna say about that. I can say the stuff I told to the Mr. Kesh, the teaching few weeks ago or month ago. I can tell that one. Do you want?
If you want.
Okay. That one. Okay. So I already told Mr. Kesh in the teaching maybe a month ago. It was like that. It was a dream. It was a dream. It's like a I saw somebody is a famous doctor. Two ladies, two middle-aged ladies, maybe 35 to 45 years old. Both are same age and very pretty, very professional dress. And in the rich people house, very big house, big living room, is like a very expensive stuff in there. The two lady is torturing the doctor, the famous doctor, and we know he is a very good doctor in regular life. So when I saw the torture,
the two ladies you said were torturing the doctor?
Yeah, the man.
Okay.
He's like he's very tall, very healthy, very healthy. That man, we know a lot of us know, but I'm not gonna say the name. So very tall and very strong man. So I suddenly I was maybe meditation and then fall asleep. And when I saw that, I get shocked and I scared. So, and right away it took me, whoever showing the scene, that scene to me, they took me to other places when I was scared and shocked. I was just panic simply. And then they took me to the other places and the normal dream. I'm seeing now normal dream. And then few minutes later, they brought me that scene again. And this time I am little bit okay. So I was trying to connect with those lady in my mind, and then I asked those lady, why you torturing that man? He is a good guy, and we know he is helping everybody. And they say, no, you don't know. People doesn't know. He is a very bad person, and he did a lot of bad stuff to his all children and women all his life. So he needs to be punished. And that those lady trying to punish him before killing him, how much he can get the pain. They did doing very bad stuff, very bad. I can take. So so I feel their emotion, that lady there doesn't have any emotion. They're like a robot. They're saying we are doing our duty. And then I try to connect with the doctor, that man who is tied to the some kinds of chair, laying chair, those kinds of chair. Yeah. So I connect with him, and I say, why you are not asking forgiveness to them? And the doctor say, I know I did bad thing, and then they're not gonna excuse me or forgive me. They will give me punishment, whatever I did, and I will get the punishment. So and then
I
that's
sense you're of the Buddhist tradition. Yes? No?
no.
Okay, because I know I went to a Buddhist temple and they had this big, I don't know what you call it, like a drawing, but it was an embroidery actually. And they showed all these entities in the universe, and they all had different weapons. Some had knives, some had sticks, some had spears, and the rest of this. And I asked the one of the leaders there, I said, why do these people here in this dimension, you could see the clouds and they were in the clouds and the rest of it. And I said, why do they all have weapons? And she said, she said to me, that's because when you do bad, they can hit you with it.
I'm now I'm going to say another different thing, but now I'm going to say first I finished that story. I think in future or sometimes maybe robotic type something will punish people. Maybe.
Yeah, I
I
think
didn't.
we're away from punishment. We're more the change comes through the elevation of the soul, not the degrading of the soul. That's why
Yeah,
all Mr. Kesh's devices are for elevation of the soul.
yeah. We are
Mhm.
if we are stay in third dimension, we are not staying here. We are changing we are elevating ourselves or other people, so we can go other places, other level. But if we stay in here, so we have to suffer because third dimension. People doesn't stay the same places. If I do good, I will my level will be high. I won't see what is happening in here. I won't feel anything in here.
Okay.
That is the change.
Okay.
And it is my understanding about
Sure.
this.
Sure. We're all the captains of our own ship. And again, what's heaven to you may be hell to me, and vice versa.
Yeah.
This is the
And now,
understanding. Yeah.
Now I'm gonna say I have a sword. It's round. It's like round. Two sided sword. In my I told before I used to save little people. Sometimes I tell before, right? 1-2 times, but I didn't explain everything. I have that time, those kinds of fight, I had round sword, two-sided sword. It is round, and I use those like a cartoon. Whatever you told me, like what is that?
I
Buddhist
wasn't
people.
there. I wasn't
No.
there.
You was
So
talking about the Buddhist people, those people. They
yes,
have a
yes,
weapon.
yes. With the
Yeah, that's
big
why I
carpet. Yeah. And they all had weapons. I was like, what is this? And she says, oh, that's for when you do something wrong, they hit you with them or they poke you with them.
Yeah, that's why I told. It's funny. Yeah.
Okay. But we know there's no war in space and there's no killing in space. And I don't think there's any abuse. As Mr. Kesh said, the stronger entity never abuses a weaker entity. And this is the ethos of the universe.
Because they understand. If you are not peaceful, you can go there. When we are low level, we do stuff, but when we peaceful, we can do those kinds of stuff, and we go peacefully there, not like this level, this way. When I told you before, when I maybe getting the spaceship, that time my mind was totally peaceful, and it is not like the peaceful like here. It is different kinds of feeling. I can explain. It is totally different. It is like a light air, very different thing. It is no language to explain. So when you
Yes.
go that level, how can you hurt other? No way.
Yeah. Yeah, he explained it as one time as the emotion of completeness,
Yeah.
where you don't need the money, you don't need the food, you don't need the house, you don't really need anything. You're just in the balanced fields of the soul of the existence.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Alex, I'm going to take the screen, if that's okay. And let's just bring up our closing windows here. And I want to thank everyone for being here. Alex, is there anything else you'd like to add, or Selena, or anyone else?
I'm done today.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all.
And even though the others don't quite understand the work we're doing, we're just pioneers. May you all be proud of the work you do. May you all be proud of the person you are, and may you all be proud of the difference you make. And of course, that's a beautiful elevating phrase in a way. And then, of course, we have the three kings, the three wise men, actually. And you should always carry these three wise men in your pocket or very close to you or within yourself, because you can use them in almost every situation you come into. The thinking good, the speaking good, and the doing good. And this creates a huge shield of protection, I think, around you, that not a lot of things can attach to you in the wrong way when you're thinking, speaking, and acting good. Even though it may be hard, even though you may feel that you're justified in saying a wrong word to someone or trying to bring their soul down a bit, even though you're just saying some words to them, It's all about adding to the soul and not taking away from another soul. And these three wise men have brought us gifts that most of us have missed. But now Mr. Kesh has opened that book, and we can confidently carry these three wise men with us wherever we go and whatever we do, whether it's here on this planet or traveling across the universe. And again, another, in a way, preconditioning for our new experiences in a way in the universe. So I just thought I'd share that. I did want to play the what Mr. Kesh mentioned about the calcium and the breast cancer and the rest of this. It's about a 10-minute clip, and then the final disclaimer will be played. Is there, and this is from the 537th Knowledge Seekers Workshop, the one that was just delivered last Thursday. Are there any other comments, thoughts, questions, or something somebody wanted to bring up? And of course, keep in mind, you can raise funds or donate funds for others, whether it's to go into the transmutation session, whether it's to attend the next conference in Iran or Washington, or whether it's to help someone to get into the research centers. It doesn't have to be the whole amount. It can be a small amount. You can make a donation to the Kesh Foundation and designate it how you'd like it to be used. But if you have enough and you're willing to share with the others, please feel free to do that. Again, in the giving you receive, but you're not giving to receive, but it's just the process that happens. So I thought we'd bring that up. Again, this was Sanya in China, but that one is over, and the next one coming up maybe later this year or earlier next year, depending on how the authorities grant the permission to hold a conference in Isfahan. We'll have to see. But Washington will be following that one. So we'll have to wait and see what comes up or what's rattling in the next few months and so on for the next space traveler seminar. Just as a reminder. I was just debating whether to play Keep Kesh Free for Humanity, Keep Kesh Foundation Free for Humanity, or the latest one. And I think I'll play this latest one. It's just a 10-minute clip. Again, Cancer and Cosmic Rays, a new approach. Anyone else have anything else they'd like to add or say? I want to thank you, Alex, for again being with us, guiding us through some of this difficult terrain. Of course, in the future, we'll probably look back and laugh and say, how come we didn't get it? How come it was so much trouble to work through all this knowledge? But we're gaining step by step, little by little, we're all growing into this understanding. And no one's above anyone else and no one's below anyone else. All the souls are equal, as I understand it.